So I can currently go and sign in using as a guest user, but we're gonna need a valid user identity provider. So let's say you want to have your users sign in via your single sign-on provider, your GitHub login, your Google login, Okta, could be anything. So in our example, we're going to set up a very simple GitHub login, right? But you could do that in several other ways. So how do we do this? So let's understand the Backstage authentication setup. So you can see you have all of these sign-in providers that you can use to set up sign-in onto in Backstage. So I'm going to use GitHub here, right? And that will do it. So you got GitHub that we're going to use. And what do we want to do here is that ultimately, let me log out. When I sign in, users should see an option to sign in via their GitHub. Why is that important? So that they can only sign in. Once they sign in, they will be able to give you their credentials, and their profile will be there, and there will be some sort of team that they're part of. And based on that, you can decide the ownership of that. So that's going to be the whole concept of when you sign in, you decide the user identity that's going to be assigned to that user. So right now it's only guest. We're going to remove that. And when I sign in via GitHub, we're going to see our own credentials. So let's do that. So now in order to set up a GitHub sign in, we need a GitHub OAuth app. We need a GitHub OAuth app, not a GitHub app. That there are different things that you should consider. So GitHub app is a service account, while a GitHub OAuth app is a way for you to sign in to this. So let's start. Go to settings. I'm going to increase the font a bit. Go to settings, then go to your GitHub OAuth app. Here you go. I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to call it Backstage, My Portal OAuth app, right? The homepage URL is going to be where this is coming from. So here it's coming from my localhost 3000. Ideally, you should have two OAuth app, one for your local development and one for your production development, and we'll talk about both later on. And that's it. This is my OAuth application. The other thing is the callback URL. So once I sign in via GitHub, where the authenticated information is going to send back to. So that will be my backend URL. So in our case, it's this particular thing that this is sent to. That's it. So I have a client ID here. Let me also generate a client secret. And this thing I'm going to keep in my app config. So right now, you see Backstage also gives you an app config.local.yaml. So GitHub app secret. Let me just put this here. GitHub app ID, client ID. All right. So if you look at it here, this is not going to be committed. It's part of your git ignore. Anything that ends with .local.yaml. So you can keep your local app credentials here and not commit it. So the production app will have a different config. The local will have a different config. I'll talk more about this later on. So we have these two secrets. That's good. And now we're going to set up our configuration. So what we will do here is, excuse me, we will go to the app.config.yaml. So this is our app.config.yaml. Is there an auth piece here? Yeah. This is empty. Let's add this to our what do we say? Our app.config.local.yaml. Let's copy this, put this here. So we have a guest provider right now. We're gonna remove that. The other provider we need is GitHub. And we're gonna say for development environment, we use this thing, and we'll say the environment itself is development. So you can switch environments just here, and you can have different credentials. So for GitHub development, I have my client ID. That is my this thing. And I have my client secret, so I actually messed it up. The client ID is this. The secret is this. Okay. Now this is only for github.com. If you're working on your custom GitHub enterprise, so this is the place where you should be writing that. So let's say you're working on ghe.mycompany.net, and this is that thing will go. Of course, you would have created your OAuth app on the GitHub enterprise. So let's remove that. Finally, the other piece that it's important, and it's a very Backstage concept, is the sign-in resolver. What that means is once GitHub sends us some data, so once we get a data like, hey, this is the user that is signing in, which means this is their GitHub username, this is their email address, this is the profile picture, like all of this data GitHub app will send us. What do we do with that app, right? So that is called a resolver, which means we'll take that data and create a Backstage user identity, the identity that the user will contain. Now there are some predefined resolvers that comes with Backstage. So one is username matching user entity name. This is the default. Now this is very dangerous, I would say. So what this says is matches the username from the auth provider. So in this case, it's going to be OrkoHunter coming from my GitHub. And if matches that with the user entity in catalog. Now our catalog does not have a user entity today. So our catalog is empty. So this just to show you that there's a guest, but that's it. I'll talk about what is catalog, what is the entities and all of that. So this is not going to work for us. What can work is matches the email address from the auth provider with the user entity. No, we don't want to do it with the user entity. Matches the local part of the email address from them. This is not good. We need a resolver right now which can assign a user without having to have the user in the catalog. So that is where we need to create a custom resolver. Yeah. By the way, there is going to be a backend installation that we'll have to do. We'll come to that later. So how do we create a backend resolver, right? This is the way. So let me show you what the code looks like for these resolvers. But let me also show you what's happening right now. So I've added GitHub as a sign-in provider, right? Let's reload our app and see how this looks. It's not there because we made a change to the app config, and it's showing an error. Config file, config source, failed to read config file, expected object at config root. Oh, these things are not valid YAML. All right, so now let's go to our terminal. Let's start the app again. But it's not showing my GitHub here, and there is a reason for that. So if you go to packages, app, source, and your app.tsx, there is something called a sign-in page. The sign-in page is your page that you're seeing here. The sign-in page requires a provider to be added. So you say your provider here. GitHub is also one provider that you can add. If you want to see what all things are possible, then please take a look. Well, it's saying GitHub is not a provider here. Let's take a look at the docs. Oh, okay, it requires an object, not necessarily that way. Okay, so we got this providers array. The other thing we need here is a object. Let's create that. The object will have an ID. Let's copy this thing. So we copied that thing. Now this GitHub auth API ref needs to be imported. So we can import that from the core plugin API in our app. So that is good. It solves the issues, and we should be good here. I need Prettier to be installed so that it formats it automatically. All right, so it's showing up now. But remember, it's not going to work today because I have the it's created a new window because my resolver requires the user to be present in the catalog. It's not there. So I'm gonna unknown auth provider GitHub. Yeah, so this is where I also need to install the backend backend package of the GitHub auth provider. So this is the command you need to run. So close your backend, paste this. So it's yarn inside the packages backend folder. We are adding a new module called Backstage, plugin auth backend module, GitHub provider. So this is particularly for the GitHub provider. And then in your packages backend source.tx, you need to add this line. Backend source index.ts, add this line at the bottom. Now this is what's known as Backstage new backend system. So if you're running this on older Backstage, especially before 1.28, your backend will look different. And this tutorial does not apply to that. So that's why I've started afresh, and you should also start with a new Backstage app creation. But if you have created this with the latest version, you'll get this. All right, so I've added this to my backend. Let's restart the backend. All right, backend is running. Let's start. Let's reload our page. All right, so now if we try to sign in, it should show our GitHub OAuth app. So this screen, if you see, it's your GitHub OAuth app screen. This is gonna be similar if you set up your sign in via your Okta, Google, and whatnot. So now if I hit continue, it's gonna fail because GitHub will authenticate me. Backstage will try to see if that user exists in the catalog, and it's gonna say no, that does not exist. So you see, unable to resolve user identity. Please verify that your catalog contains the expected user entry should match your configured sign resolver. That's not good. So we need to create a resolver, a sign-in resolver, which does not expect the user to be in the catalog. Now in future, if you set up your catalog in a way where you sync users from your SSO provider to the catalog, and that's good. You can switch back to this resolver. But now we'll have to create a new one. So let's do that. So this is where we need to go to the custom sign-in resolver page, which is here. So no, sorry, not here. Here, in auth identity, you need to go to building custom resolver. So let's go to our index.ts and let's create this line in there. So let me call this auth authentication stuff. All right, I've got my custom auth resolver. This ID must be exactly auth because that's the plugin it targets. Okay. This ID must be unique, but can be anything. Custom auth provider. That's fine. Register. It needs the auth provider thingy. Register. This ID must match the actual provider config addressing the auth provider. GitHub means that it must be GitHub. So yeah, I mean, if you are configuring this for your, like if you have your Google here, Okta here, and you're trying to build a resolver for those, then you go there. You write that here. Factory, create auth provider factory. This is our logic. This is where our logic will go. We also need a few imports. So let's import that. Wonderful. What are the errors? Oh, do we have that? Oh, I actually added the imports there. I'm going to move it from here and move it to the top. Cool. So now we have this. Now the sign-in resolver is where our logic will go. So they don't have a sample here on what we need to do with the info, the context, and what do we need to return. So let's take a look at an example. So this is an example. Let me copy this entire thing. And let me format this correctly so that this goes in here. All right. So what we're doing is we assume that the information will give us the email address, and we need an email address. So That's a requirement you can set. If you don't have an email address, then you say the user content has no email address. Now, this is where you can also do things like email.split, right? You can say at, right? And then you can say the second portion. Well, actually, this is documented here. So this is an email validator. You can add your own custom logic here. And you can say the email must contain at like mycompany.net or something like that, and you can throw an error. So I'm gonna disable this. And here it's taking the first part of the email and taking this as a name. Now again, the context sign in with catalog user is again wrong. So this is the expectation that the user lives in the catalog. So that's not what we need. What we need is ctx dot issue token is what we need to call. And let's see if there's an example for that. There we go. So let's copy this. Okay. I don't know why that port thing is coming up all the time. So now that we have this, don't show again. Yes. There are two things that you need to be aware about here. One is these are JOT concepts, JWT. So we are creating a JSON web token here. That will be the Backstage identity. And we are saying this is the subject. So this thing should be the unique identifier. So here you can say, like here I'll say ID, or not email ID, but I'll say like user ID, right? Now so look at this, like I'm splitting, let's say my email address is himanshu@orkohunter.net. I'm taking Himanshu as the user ID. You can take the entire email as a user ID, that is also fine. So I'm removing that. I'm saying subject is my user ID. And this is the interesting thing. I will not dive too much into this, but here you can add different identities of the user. So what you can do here is you can say something like GitHub, and you can say GitHub dot user ID, and this is where you can like fetch that information from the info. Let's log this. Let's say console.log info. Let's see what's inside, right? So that we have an understanding of what do we get from GitHub. And I'm gonna put this so that it's easy to find. Let's open our terminal. This has restarted, and let's try to sign in again. So if I sign via GitHub, so let me try by removing that config. Try again. Starting auth. Configuring done. Okay. Subclaim provided by author is not valid entity. See, now it's working. Now it's working, and I can see my token and everything. All right, so this needs to be updated actually. Let's make a PR, and I can fix this entity ref thing. So let's copy this entity ref creator. There you go. So entity ref is just a format of how you write Backstage entities. It's like basically three things: the kind of the entity, the namespace, which is often default, and the name, which is the ID. Let's go to the index.ts. So this, we can make it something like this. I need prettier badly. User entity, kind user, name is basically my user ID, and namespace is default. That's my user entity. I'll make it my subject, and I'll make it a claim. I'll talk about that later. Let me import this. The command dot doesn't work. Control dot. Gify entity ref from Backstage catalog model. Okay. Jesus. Function not implemented. Okay, it's working. So now, if you see, I've got my profile and everything, and my sign-in is complete. And this is using the custom sign-in resolver, where I can decide what will happen when the user is signing in. I can add my guardrails, I can add my conditions, and then I can issue the JWT token with the custom way in which it should be done. So like I can add different identities of the user across different platforms, and that can be retrieved in my plugins. So it's very powerful. Check out this page called Identity Resolver if you want to try different stuff. But let me just summarize. How did we add an identity provider? So the very first step we did was we went ahead and saw whether there is an existing identity provider that we want to implement with. So we found GitHub. You could really work with Google, Okta, anything else as well. Like you can sign by Azure, GitLab, and a bunch of other things. So and then we added, then we created a GitHub OAuth application. We added some details like the homepage URL, backend URL. Now, if you're doing this for production, then the homepage URL will be where your app is actually deployed, not the local host one, and similarly where the backend URL lives. Most likely it's going to be the same. So it's going to be one URL here, and on the same URL you'll add this /API and the rest of this. So if this is only true for GitHub. For different auth providers this is going to be different, and you can find the docs inside. Then we added the secrets here, credentials here, and then we wanted to create our own resolver, so we have to remove this piece. Don't leave this hanging. I spent about 1.5 hours on this, so don't leave this hanging. Remove this, and then go to this page called Custom Sign-in Resolver. It's somewhere here. Custom Sign Resolver, and then just copy paste this in your backend stuff, and this is where you need to write the logic. I've written something similar here. You can see what I have written. I'll remove the logs, but you can actually see what's coming in the info to decide how to make this work. I've got like the profile here, which I'm not using actually. So I can actually remove this. Well, actually, I'm using the email from the profile, so that's important. I'm converting this user ID from the first part of the email address to the user entity using this method from Backstage, and I'm creating a JWT token. Sounds good. Now I have there's few other things, not yet. So the backend stuff, remove the default provider if you had added, if you're working on a custom sign-in resolver, if you're adding that. And then the front end also needs to be changed. So go to your packages app, source app.tsx, and then here you need to write the custom auth provider that you have added here. Well, this thing. Let me confirm if this also works if I just say GitHub auth provider, right? But the API ref is what matters. This is GitHub auth provider, GitHub auth API ref, and then this is where we need to remove the guest once we have the GitHub working well. Let's see if this still works. This still works. So the ID there doesn't matter. Let's remove this guest, but I'm pretty sure, yes, now it's good. You sign in, and then this will work, and you can see that your identity is here. So that completes our authentication setup.